So for surveyors, you want to make sure that you're giving them the correct and safe information, but you don't want to overshare. Like they don't need to know the extra information. So if ever in doubt, I would say share enough to answer their question and don't go into too much detail unless they ask for more information.
Infection stops where information starts. Welcome to the Transmission Control Podcast, where knowledge is your strongest defense. Broadcasting from the front lines of healthcare, we dive into the strategies, science, and stories shaping infection prevention today. Each episode, we connect you with experts on real-world insights to help you stop the spread of healthcare-associated infections, protect patients, and strengthen your practices as an infection prevention and public health expert. When the right information reaches the right people, lives are saved.
Hello and welcome to the Transmission Control Podcast. Today we're meeting with Katie Belski to talk about Survey Survival 101. On this season, it's all about Citation Nation and how to make it through the perfect accreditation survey. We'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsors.
Brought to you from the studios of Healthcare HQ, let's get into it. This is Transmission Control.
Hello and welcome to the Transmission Control Podcast. My name is Garrett Hollenbeek, Editor-in-Chief for Transmission Control, and we're joined today by co-host Jill Holdsworth. Jill, how are you today?
Hello. I am doing great. How are you doing, Garrett?
I'm good. Getting into season 2, it's all about Citation Nation and getting ready for everybody's favorite time of the year, accreditation surveys. So today we are talking with Katie Belski, Infection Preventionist out there in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Katie, did I get that right?
Got that right. Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
All right. And Katie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And you have a unique background in both SPD, IP, and in quality as well, correct?
I got my start in healthcare, actually in dietary, and transferred into sterile processing and spent about 20 years working in sterile processing, worked for a couple of years in quality as a quality and patient safety coordinator, where I worked alongside surveyors pretty closely, and most recently just transferred into infection prevention.
And I have to give a little background about my friendship with Katie, because I guess I kind of knew both of you before you transferred into infection prevention, which is kind of cool that we're all here together. Katie was one of those people who really wanted to kind of move into infection prevention, and she did it. And I just love to tell the story of people who have that interest or not really sure, how to do it, or what do you do if you want to go into something different and you really want to, or where do you start? And sometimes it's just connecting with others that are already doing it. And what do I study? What do I read? What do I look into? And that's, I think, where Katie and I really connected, because she had that big interest in IP. She was currently working in quality. I had a big interest in SPD, and she had that background. So we really connected and became really close friends over that. And I was her biggest cheerleader going into her transition into IP. So that's my kind of soapbox moment for anybody who wants to move into something different, that you can do it. And if you need a cheerleader, all of us are here for you if you want to move into one of these fields.
Yeah, I don't know how many people out there know this, but Jill is a huge champion for people moving into the IP space or honing their IP skills, and a very similar experience. I met Jill for the first time at a conference, and at the process. I was kind of in the interview stages for a role in infection prevention coming from SPD. And she's like, well, who's your manager? Who's the person that you're meeting with? I'll see if I know him. And, this is the APIC roadmap that you want to check out, the novice roadmap. So there are great champions out there, and Jill's one of them. So Katie, we've got that in kind.
Yeah. Well, and Jill knows everyone too. So it's very helpful if you need to be introduced to someone.
And if I don't know you yet and you're listening, then I expect to meet you soon.
That's the real thing.
She'll be the extrovert that adopts you.
Yeah, that's right. Everybody needs an extrovert friend. Speaking of friends that we don't love seeing as often, or maybe we only hope to see them once every 3 years, Katie, I want to ask you about the most stressful or memorable survey experience you've had for an accreditation survey.
Definitely the most stressful would be my first survey I went through as a newer leader. I wanted to make sure I was prepared. So I sought out resources. I went to the Joint Commission website specifically for sterile processing and sought out those resources and tried to be as prepared as I could. I quizzed my staff to make sure they were prepared. And they have a part in the survey process where they have you select an employee file. And you bring the file to a room and they review the file in front of you. And a very seasoned leader of another department went before me, and it was nerve-wracking. I'm seeing them go through this, and there's gaps in documentation, files missing on competencies, supporting education to those competencies that were missing, and it really had me nervous. So then I went next after him, and I'm fearing the worst because I just saw what happened with him. And she actually held mine up as an example and said, this is exactly how everybody should look. You need to have the competency here and then all your education throughout the year that matches and coincides with your competency, including the staff sign off, the dates. So, but definitely stressful. When you see somebody else go through it that had a wider array of education than I did at the time and much more experience, and they had some shortfalls, I was expecting to have some similar experiences.
I think it's a good point to talk about the education and competency piece, because one thing that I tell people all the time, that once you get your CIC, you're not done. And just because you're a leader in IP, you're not done. And surveyors are going to pull whatever file they want to. In my experience, I have had my file pulled as a manager. I've had them ask for any random IPs file that they want to, which is great because I always have, the one that I feel like is the best, or they pull an IP that maybe they met along the way. But what they want to look at is if you have your CIC, but you got it 10 years ago and you've never done any education since then, which I guess you probably don't still have your CIC if that's the scenario, but they want to make sure that you're continuing your education. If you don't have your CIC, then they're wanting to make sure that you are still competent to do the job that you're doing and the tasks that you're doing. So have you done training? So those are the important things to have in those files. And I know that there is an APIC white paper that came out this past year that helps you walk through what competency means in IP, so that when the Joint Commission surveyors do ask you for your competency justification, if you really know what that white paper says, you can say, well, I'm going by the white paper from APIC, and that's how I'm outlining my employee file. So if you haven't read that yet, definitely pull that and really understand the components of that. It'll be very, very helpful to you.
That's an excellent resource. I'm glad you said that too, because with the shifts in job titles and who's reporting to who, we've seen it where, somebody's manager left and then it's the next level of leadership up that had to kind of present that competency piece. And if you're working at a system level, that may be somebody that has less familiarity with you than your previous manager. And so all of those documents have to be pretty universal and pretty well in place, and then accessible no matter what time of year the surveyor shows up. So I think those are really good call outs. Now, Katie, I know for myself, my perspective of an accreditation survey shifted a lot from being a department manager to being on the IP side of things. And you've got, with your background in quality and IP and SPD, how would you say your perspective has shifted between those different backgrounds?
I would say my perspective shifted most drastically from working as an SPD tech, as a more of a regular employee, to then going into leadership or jobs that hold more responsibility, working closely with surveyors, because you see it more from a surveyor perspective, the why behind their visits, and that they're not there to get you. I feel like that's a common misconception, is, this fear behind when they hear a surveyor's there and everybody wants to run and hide. And it's really more there to be collaborative, and that to make sure that units are doing what they need to keep the patient safe. And I think having that perspective helps a lot, and just being able to now anticipate the needs of surveyors when they come, especially once I was on the quality team and working alongside surveyors, just knowing what to expect from them right away, what I'll need to have for them right away. It's probably the biggest shift in mindset I've had.
Can you talk a little bit more? Because I think that's a really interesting point of knowing what the surveyors needed as you worked with them. Can you give us some examples of what that may look like?
Number one thing I see most frequently that can get you into trouble is policies. So they're often forgotten. People let them expire, but don't, that'll be the first thing. Let's say you had an employee that called and anonymously reported, and there's a complaint. Whatever that complaint is about will be the first thing those surveyors want. They'll want, let me see your fire policy. Let me see your policy on attire in the OR or anything like that. Whatever the surveyor is there for, they're going to want those policies right away.
And on the topic of policies, the thing I see people most cited for is following their own policies. If you don't even know what your policy says, the surveyor is going to actually read it and then go see if you're following it. So you can have a very, very strict policy, or you can have a very relaxed policy, but whatever it says, that's what you're held to. So you have to be careful not to have every single thing written into a policy, or you're going to get yourself in trouble, because that is exactly what they're going to survey to.
Mm-hmm. And you could almost paint yourself in a corner with your policies by making them so stringent. Or we've even seen where people put specific vendor name brands in your policy, and that can really get you in troubles. Where if you have, we like to call low temp sterilization STERAD, just because that's a big, name out there. Same way that we talk about tissues as Kleenex or, Xerox. But if your facility policy says STERAD all the way through, and you've moved to a different vendor or a different brand, or you've got vPro machines in there, I think you can make the case that you're out of compliance with your policy.
It's funny that you say that.
That's a really good point.
I've seen that recently in a lot of IFUs that I've been looking at for instrumentation, where they name specific brand names of brushes and things like that. That's exactly why these IFUs have become so difficult, because not only do they have so many pieces to them for the cleaning, but they have brand names of the pieces to clean. So that's exactly why, again, the IFUs are so hard. So great point.
Just to reiterate what Jill said, you don't want to be too specific in your policies, because you can get yourself into trouble then. They'll look for you to be compliant to your policies. So you want just enough in there to guide the staff in the right direction, and where they can reference it and make sure it's guiding them towards doing everything the right, safe way, but not so detailed where if they have one misstep, it's going to get them into trouble.
Katie, have you found any strategies that have been helpful as an IP to help kind of calm nerves of people as they prepare for surveys, or just to answer questions for surveyors as they come around? We don't want to have those people that we want to kind of shuffle to their break time when surveyors come to the unit. So how do we just generally prepare everybody to stay calm, take a deep breath, and to be able to answer correctly?
What I found works best is just practice. So rounding on the units with team members, with leaders, asking those questions and making sure that over time the team members feel comfortable responding, where it becomes second nature versus we decide not to prepare till right before we hit our survey window. And then everybody feels on the spot. They don't feel prepared. They don't know the why behind what they're being told they should respond. And I think also making team members aware of their resources so that if they do forget because they're on the spot, that they can say, I don't know, but let me find that for you. And they know where to go to locate that information.
Yeah, I think that's so key. I don't know, but let me go find it. I think that team members forget that that's okay. And that surveyors think that's okay if they use their resources and their references. It is so much better than spouting off the wrong answer, which we see a lot because people are nervous. So they just kind of say whatever comes to their mind when they could really just look at the label on the disinfectant or whatever they're looking at.
And I've seen that happen where we're doing mock survey rounding and we ask sterile processing tech and decontam, what's the contact time for the enzymatic you're using? And it's right in front of them. And they weren't sure. So, and that's one of those things where as you practice, then techs will be like, oh yeah, why did I do that? It's right here in front of me. But when you're on the spot like that, it's better to be on the spot and get those nerves out practicing than in person in front of a surveyor where they might then be concerned, why don't the staff know this, and start digging deeper and asking for policies or competencies.
Yeah, it definitely does seem that once a surveyor kind of finds the tip of the iceberg, that's when they start to dig. And if they feel like staff is unfamiliar on, let's say, where to find an IFU, then all of the IFUs get kind of pulled into question. And can you locate this one? Well, how about this one? And they can really get down a rabbit hole. One of the things I want to get your insight on, Katie, is when talking with a surveyor, should staff speak to how they do the process or how the process is supposed to be done? Because we don't always do things the way they should be done. So how should staff speak to it?
Well, in my opinion, having worked alongside surveyors, what should be done and what the staff are doing should be fairly similar. If it's not, I would say those units need to reassess the way their processes are being driven, because we should be running departments that are survey ready, that are doing what's safest and what's best, that we're educating our team members, making sure their competencies are up to date. If we have processes that are differing too much from what we would be responding to as surveyor, that would be something we would want to work on. But I mean, I get there's the by the book way. So for surveyors, you want to make sure that you're giving them the correct and safe information, but you don't want to overshare. Like they don't need to know the extra information. So if ever in doubt, I would say share enough to answer their question and don't go into too much detail unless they ask for more information.
I'm so glad you said that, because that is such a good point for everyone to remember. And as IPs, that's a great point for us to remind people about, that you only answer their question, be concise, only give them the minimum amount of words it takes to answer their question and nothing more. I had a survey years ago where a nurse somehow got off on a tangent about a TB exposure during a survey. And the question they asked had nothing to do with TB exposures at all, TB at all. And so then the surveyor became very interested in our exposure process and TB in general. And we ended up spending the entire survey focused on that. And it should never even come up. So again, don't get nervous and just start blabbering. Literally say as little as possible.
Yeah, that speaks to the need to practice too, because when people get nervous, they do tend to ramble, or they tend to like clam up so much that they can't even eke out an answer. And practicing is, Katie's mentioned, you're going to play how you practice. Now, Katie, have you ever seen kind of a gotcha question or one that caught your staff off guard?
A common one is for SPD, if staff are able to look up IFUs, can you access MSDS sheets? I've seen some employees get caught up on that. A lot of it is through intranet now, and if you have more seasoned employees, they might be more familiar with a binder. So just doing those questions that they don't get asked a lot until a surveyor comes around, I think are the more gotcha ones. Oh, and some of those low-hanging fruit type things where it's nails, and then you see one person with non-compliant nails, and then they start looking closer at everybody's nails and it snowballs, or they see tape in one area and then it becomes widespread tape they start to notice.
I will say one I've seen a lot more recently is glucometer cleaning. They may not look at it that closely until they see blood on a glucometer. Then they're going to look up the IFU for how to clean the glucometer. And some of these devices have very interesting ways that you're supposed to actually clean them, like go up and down with a wipe 3 times and then across 3 times and around in a circle 50 times. It's like crazy. And so they may not actually look at that until they find a dirty one. So again, it's just speaking to making sure processes are done right all the time so you don't draw their attention. Because like Katie said, if they see one person with fake nails, then they're going to start looking at everybody's nails. And then it's going to become a widespread issue on your safer matrix instead of just like low limited type of finding. And so it kind of opens you up to get things moving up on your safer matrix, which you don't want. Yeah, I hate watching that thing each day as you see things moving up into darker colors. Hopefully you guys know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, maybe we need to educate on that too.
Yeah, no, that's a real thing when the panic starts and we had a one-off finding at one site, and then they went to the ambulatory center and they saw the same thing, and now it's a widespread. And now one thing that I feel like is an emphasis in the last couple of years is reviewing previous findings and seeing where the facility is on those. That's been a big push to make sure that even if we saw it 3 years ago and you addressed it and we didn't have to come back for it, we still want to check in on those things. Katie, what advice or guidance do you have for keeping sustained improvements going?
Action plans work well for short-term correction, but then it really is on the unit leaders to collaborate with IP, with quality, to make sure that there's a scheduled cadence that we could even support, helping the leader around in their unit, adding it even to your calendar to make sure you're doing that monthly rounding and checking is very helpful. But also for the leaders of these units, if they know they have these findings, to take it upon themselves to do some documentation on what the action plan was, what the findings were, and date when you rounded and what those findings were, so that if there's a resurvey, you have that proof to give the surveyors right away. Here's what we've done to correct it, and here's my follow-up that shows it's been fixed that I've been doing each month or whatever the cadence is.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And who really owns that? Because I know a lot of things fall under the IC, the infection control category, but it may not be infection prevention that's owning that piece or that process. So for leadership follow-up, like you've discussed, who owns that piece?
What I've seen, it's usually, depending what the finding is. If it's an infection control finding, infection preventionist would be involved along with the unit leader, and usually quality is involved as well.
Yeah, and I've seen this work a couple different ways. As long as there's somebody that's the point person for these action plans, it seems to work okay. Some of the areas, let's use SPD as a good one, it crosses into a lot of different areas. It falls under the infection control chapter, but it's the SPD department. It might also cross into the OR. So you have a lot of leaders that may have a stake in the game, but you have to have one person that's in charge of the overall action plan that has to be turned into Joint Commission. So sometimes you just need one person that's overseeing that particular item that you're working on, or if you are cited, then the action plan that has to be turned into Joint Commission so that there is follow-up and sustainment. So I think that's important because I've seen it go bad the other way too, that there's a problem, Nobody actually took the lead. Everybody thought they had more time than they did. And then it was time for Joint Commission to come back, and nobody had taken care of it yet. So that would be my advice. Have a point person who can work with all the departments on whatever you're working on, preferably proactively.
Yeah, that's a great point, because there's a difference between who's doing it and who's responsible for making sure it gets done. We may not always have the line of sight to go and physically check or clean the glucometers every day. But if that's an infection prevention standard, then we have to be, as Katie mentioned, involved in making sure that it gets done.
Seems like everything gets cited under our chapters, so we have to have some sort of involvement in all of it.
And I think one of the challenges for IPs is we talk about survey readiness, and it almost becomes white noise in the background of like, our windows open in 60 days, and then, it's 6 months before they get here. So how do we keep sites and leaders survey ready even when we're a little ways out?
For the leaders, I think partnering with them, letting them know what's important that surveyors are going to be looking for, and then making sure for them that they're holding daily or routine huddles with their staff where they're quizzing their staff or IP or qualities, helping quiz the staff so that by the time surveyors are there, they feel completely prepared. And there's things that get forgotten over time. Like, things will look good, and then you'll round in a department a week later. Who hung the paper sign up that's not laminated with the Scotch tape everywhere? So sometimes the people who are in the department every day won't notice it because they walk past it every day. And so it does help to invite other departments to round in the unit regularly to make sure that they can help catch anything that they might be missing.
This is where I feel like those who have DNV as their surveyor actually have a bit of an advantage because they come every year. And I know when I first had DNV at a different institution, I thought, oh my gosh, they're coming every year. This is horrible. But then you actually learn to like it because you don't have to pry people every year to continually be ready, because you have to be continually ready. I'm currently in my first year post survey, and I feel like it's not easy to get people to want to continue Joint Commission rounds and all of these survey readiness things, because they're like, well, we just had our survey last year. Why do we have to keep doing this? But everybody will get really serious when we're like a year out again. And that's so frustrating to people like us, like quality IP, all of us. It never changes, even though we all always say we're going to be continually ready. We can't do it alone.
One of the best drills that I've seen for pre-survey is one of our accreditation folks took the golden hour checklist, and she actually timed how long it took people to do. And in one department, it was done in like 5 minutes. And then in another department, it took them like 2.5 hours. So her take was, this is not, and I don't know if this is kind of specific to our facility, but that golden hour checklist is all the things you need to tidy up before the surveyor gets there. And they can be helpful, but then a lot of stuff gets added to that golden hour checklist, and it's going to take way longer than last minute to do it. So I don't know if you guys have seen success with this, but it's become a pet peeve of mine that everything gets tossed onto the golden hour checklist.
Well, and I would say make sure not to leave the golden hour checklist, or what I've seen as a sweep checklist. Don't leave it out for the surveyors to see, because if they see what's on it, that's going to be what they look at first.
That's a good point.
Like, leave it all out on the nurses' station so that they see, like, oh, here's your Joint Commission day one sweep checklist. And so they'll be like, oh, is this what you did this morning?
Well, it gives them a really good focus point. Let's look at that first, since it should be done.
See if you did it all.
Mm-hmm.
Katie, as we close out today, I want to have you share an experience where a survey has been a positive thing, and maybe some go and do things that IPs can do to prepare for their next survey.
Well, positive, I'd say this might sound cliche, but I feel like every survey can have a positive experience, because even when there's immediate threat to life findings, it's still an opportunity where your department now knows this is an issue and you can learn from it. Your hospital can grow from it and be more prepared and safer for the patients. So as stressful as they are, it's also the whole point of surveyors coming is to help identify those issues that create patient safety concerns. And that should be why we're all coming to work every day, is because we care about keeping the patient safe. So, but of course, like the story I shared before, it felt good to be recognized as a new leader, that I was doing my employee competencies correctly and everything. So I would say, on a personal level, that was the most rewarding for me.
And can I ask what because I know that's something people struggle with. What did your competency look like that made it stand out that way?
It was very simple and specific. So this was when I was an SPD, and it just outlined each decontam and then bullet pointed each area's checked off, yes, is competent or not. And sterilization, same thing, going down the line. And then I made sure to set up at least monthly education with either a vendor or myself providing it, where they would come in and support the same information that the staff were being held accountable for.
I love that. Simple and specific. Doesn't have to be one or the other. That's a great insight. Thanks for sharing that. And then anything that RIPs listening can go out and check or round on after they hear this episode to get them survey ready?
Always glucometers. Check that they're clean. Check that the strips are dated. And always the shavers. Always check that those are clean. They seem to be, it's like never ending. You'll check it, it's good one day, and then the next day, it, needs to be done again. So I would start there. And then always, the tape, the widespread tape, it's always there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Katie. This was really great. And we really enjoyed having you as a guest.
Thank you.
Wow, that was a lot of fun. And not just because Katie is a good friend of mine, as we talked about, but I love hearing her talk about surveys because she has such a great background in SPD, quality, IP. She's been on both sides of the survey field. So that's really fun to hear her perspective. And I love hearing her talk about competencies because I don't feel like we talk about that enough as IPs, but I can tell you as a manager, that does kind of make me nervous when we start talking about competencies and HR files and how to put that together. And I really want people to utilize that APIC white paper that I talked about because it can really help with that nervousness and how you can talk to surveyors. And that's a resource we've never had before.
That's a huge one because even if you're very familiar with the IC standards and the Joint Commission edition, if you skip out on HR or on your environment of care, you may be running into a huge issue. So likewise, that we talked about competency today. We will include that white paper or a link to the white paper in the show notes today. So keep an eye out for that if you're listening today. And a phenomenal guest in Katie, very practical, real world insights on how to get through a perfect survey. So remember, infection stops where information starts.
Thanks for tuning in to the Transmission Control Podcast, where infection stops because information starts. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know. Connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating and share this episode with your team. Until next time, stay informed, stay vigilant, and keep transmission under control.